She said she was going out with her friends that Friday, which wasn't news. She'd said it before, always with that casual tone, small bag in hand, hastily applied lipstick, and strong, almost suffocating perfume, as if she wanted to leave her presence lingering even after she'd left. But there was something different that day, something in the way she avoided my gaze, as if she were putting on a bit too much of a show of naturalness. The kiss she gave me on the forehead before leaving was cold, automatic, almost a mechanical obligation. I smiled back, as if believing, as if trusting, but deep down I wasn't home anymore. Some part of me was already following in her footsteps before I even got up from the couch. I put on the first coat I could find, not out of jealousy, not out of obsession, but out of instinct. There are silences between two people that speak louder than shouts. And she had been silent with me for weeks. The kind of silence that comes after too many lukewarm kisses, forced laughter, dinners where the cutlery makes more noise than the words. I walked slowly, with a strange calm within me, as if deep down I already knew. And I knew. Maybe I always knew. She didn't go to the downtown bar, nor to her usual restaurant. She entered a remote neighborhood, climbing a hill of silent houses, their windows lit with a strange warmth. She stopped in front of a simple house, but with an electronic gate. And she didn't hesitate. She rang the doorbell, smiling, a light, familiar smile. The gate opened without her needing to announce herself. And then she walked in. Without looking back. Weightless. As if she already knew the way. At that moment, the ground gave way. My body seemed present, but my soul. I don't know, maybe it remained on the sidewalk, hands in my pockets and a lost look in my eyes. I stood there for a few minutes, maybe hours, maybe seconds, observing that facade as if some explanation might emerge from it. But all that came was certainty. It wasn't the first time. The way she entered, the way the gate opened, the laugh she let out before disappearing behind the door. No, that wasn't an adventure, it wasn't a recent mistake. It was recurrent. A routine disguised as coincidence. I didn't knock on the door. I didn't shout her name. I walked home in silence. The same silence she'd been cultivating between us. I walked through the living room, looked at our photos on the wall, and felt disgusted. At myself. For taking so long to notice. Or worse, for noticing and pretending not to see. I stayed awake all night. The sound of the clock was the only thing that kept me company. At 6 a.m, I wrote a note with a trembling hand, "Stay with someone who already has your lies." I folded it slowly, left it on the kitchen table. And left. She reached out to me the next day. She called. She texted. She fumed. "It's not what it seems," she said, her voice breaking. "It was a mistake. I swear. I was confused. It was just that one time." But her words didn't match the laughter she'd given on the sidewalk in front of his house. They didn't match the intimacy with which she'd entered that gate. They didn't match the distance that had been growing between us as she disguised it all with empty hugs and plans for a future she herself had already abandoned. She cried. I heard. But I didn't speak. My silence was my loudest scream. Nothing she could say would erase the fact that she chose to lie while I still believed. That she lay in another bed while I prepared dinner. That she laughed in another room while I turned off the lights in our bedroom, waiting for her to arrive. Love doesn't die with betrayal. It rots first. And when the other person betrays, it's just a signed death certificate. Her boss didn't want anything serious. Of course not. Men like that never do. She found herself alone. She tried to get back. She tried to mend the pieces, but she forgot that the pieces she'd broken weren't the same anymore. That I wasn't the same anymore. That there was nothing left to mend. I had learned to live without her. At first, it was hard. It was like walking barefoot on glass. But then came peace. And with peace, came someone new. She had a calm gaze and a complete presence. She didn't use words to convince, she used gestures. She didn't promise, she delivered. She didn't run away, she stayed. It was the opposite of everything I'd ever experienced. And with her, I relearned what it was like to be chosen without suspicion. What it was like to have someone who didn't hide their phone. Who didn't change the subject when someone called. Who didn't need excuses because their truth was too subtle to be disguised. One day, the traitor came to me. Broken. Thin. Lackluster. Regretful. She told me she thought about me every day. That she dreamed about us. That she wanted to start over. That she was willing to do anything. I listened. With empathy, with respect, even with gratitude. Because she taught me, with her betrayal, that love isn't enough when loyalty fades. And I said firmly, with serenity, with the kind of strength that only pain well experienced brings, I've forgiven, but I'm not going back. She stood there, staring at me like someone who missed a train that would never come again. And I walked on peacefully. Not with anger, not with resentment. But with the clarity of someone who knows that certain turns are dishonest. That the past, however beautiful it may have been, couldn't compete with the clean present that now embraced me every day. She tried to smile, but it didn't come. Because those who make mistakes sometimes lose. And those who lose sometimes learn. But what she learned no longer served me. They say time heals everything. That's a lie. Time only teaches us how to live together. What heals is the choice to move on. And I chose that. Because true love doesn't beg for presents. True love doesn't share space with lies. True love may forgive, but it never forgets what was broken. And I haven't forgotten. She walked on alone. She tried other faces, other bodies, other voices. None filled the void. Because the void wasn't the absence of someone. It was the absence of someone she'd let slip away. She tried to sleep, but the dreams wouldn't let her. She dreamed of me. She dreamed of us. Of the life that could have been. Of Sundays in the park. Of silent coffees. Of hands clasped in supermarket lines. Of knowing glances at family parties. Of plans for children, for travel, for growing old side by side. All of this was now just an echo. A blur of a past she herself had tainted. She said softly, "Come back to me." But the answer was always the silence of the pillow. She tried to call me one last time. She wrote, "I still love you." I read it. I took a deep breath. I deleted it. And I slept with a peaceful heart. But there was one detail, something that no one expected. The last night, before giving up looking for me, she dreamed of me. A dream so real that she woke up smiling. I'd say in the dream, "Do you still think about me?" And she'd reply, "Every day." Then I'd smile, hold out my hand, and disappear. She woke up crying. Desperate. She got up, stumbling through the dark rooms, searching for something to anchor her. She went to the box where she kept our photos. A memory, an anchor, a refuge. But when she opened it, she found something that hadn't been there before. Something I'd left hidden years ago. Something that said so much more than words. And in that moment, she realized. Welcome to the channel. Here, no form of betrayal is romanticized or justified. The stories you'll hear are fiction, but they carry profound truths, because betrayal destroys, corrodes, and leaves scars that time cannot erase. Our purpose is to show, through each storyline, that a wrong choice can cost you the love of your life. Prepare to immerse yourself in an intense, realistic, and shocking story. The truth hurts, but it needs to be heard. Good story. It was difficult to explain what was between them without resorting to the silence of things that didn't need to be said. Ethan and Claire seemed to have been born with a similar heartbeat, as if time had made them wait for each other even before they knew they were waiting. When they met, on a random late afternoon, not even the sky seemed to know whether it wanted to rain or open. She wore a light blue dress, her hair tied up hastily, like someone who had almost given up on leaving the house. He, too distracted by his own thoughts to notice the noise around him, only looked up because she dropped a key, and the sound of it falling seemed to interrupt a sequence of ordinary days. Their first glance wasn't magical, it wasn't that kind of slow-motion encounter, but there was something there, a stopping point in the flow of days. And it was from then on that everything fell into place. Ethan was a home automation technician, a methodical, detail-oriented man who preferred to listen rather than talk. He had that kind of serene presence that doesn't immediately catch your eye, but over time becomes a haven. Claire, on the other hand, worked as an administrative assistant at a local real estate agency, with the easy smile of someone trying to be light so as not to show the weight she carries. She was intelligent, perceptive, with a sense of humor that slipped out at the most unexpected moments, as if to say, without saying it, that laughter was her way of surviving the world. They weren't quick. There was no overwhelming passion, no exaggerated declarations. The love between them grew out of habit, consistency, the light touch on the shoulder as they passed each other in the kitchen, the notes left on napkins with simple phrases like, "Today is a good day," or, "Don't forget your coat." They lived in a small house in a leafy neighborhood, where the windows caught the 10 o'clock sun and the mornings were accompanied by the sound of dry leaves being swept. The house wasn't luxurious, but it was cozy. The paintings on the walls were gradually hung, many with photos of short trips or ordinary days made special by each other's presence. The neighbors knew them as the quiet couple on the street, the ones who walked hand in hand in the late afternoon and exchanged plants with the residents across the street. Claire liked mint. Ethan preferred basil. And together, they made the garden a reflection of their care for each other. The first few years were marked by a routine that, for many, would be monotonous. But for them, it was a silent dance of complicity. She would wake up earlier, make cinnamon coffee for them both, while he organized his tools and work documents. On Sundays, they would go to the market together, unhurriedly arguing over which sauce to buy or which brand of soap was best. At night, they would watch old series or simply sit on the couch, sharing the silence. There was no rush between them, nor any pressure. Everything seemed to fall into place naturally, as if their love had chosen a calmer, more solid rhythm. Claire admired Ethan's attention to the little things. He noticed when she changed her perfume, when she left her earring on the sink, when she was silent for too long. He wasn't a man of many words, but his affection was revealed in the details. Ethan, however, saw in Claire a light he didn't know he needed. She spoke enthusiastically of the day's small victories, even those he thought insignificant, like finding a new spice or receiving a compliment from the boss. She made the ordinary beautiful. And he learned, from her, to see poetry in the everyday. Time passed like a warm summer breeze, the kind you don't notice until the season changes. Financial difficulties arose, plans changed, and nights lasted longer than they'd like. They argued occasionally, like any real couple. Sometimes she felt he was too withdrawn, other times he felt she didn't want to talk about deeper matters. But neither of them ever yelled. They respected each other. They knew where to stand. And, most importantly, they trusted each other. There was a sense that, even with their differences, love was a safe place they could return to. Ethan began working on bigger projects, which required more time away. Claire, meanwhile, received a discreet promotion, but it brought her closer to her direct boss, an older, polite, and articulate man, with whom she spent a few more hours each day. Their routines began to settle back into place, with slightly different schedules, but there were still Saturday dinners, Sunday breakfast, and Friday night movies. Everything seemed fine on the surface. The house remained clean, the notes still appeared, albeit less frequently. The touches became more spaced out, but eyes still sought each other in the hallways. Nothing that drew attention. Nothing that broke the bond. Close friends noticed that Claire was more distracted, that her eyes seemed distant at times, but they attributed it to fatigue. Ethan, for his part, was beginning to sense that something had changed in her. She was quieter, more methodical with her phone, less present in conversations. But he refused to dwell on anything wrong. He preferred to believe it was just a phase, work, stress. After all, when you love someone deeply, your mind makes excuses before accepting any painful possibility. And so, time continued to pass. One ordinary afternoon, while installing a system in a new house, Ethan saw a flower that reminded him of the day he gave Claire her first bouquet. He decided to buy one just like it. He took it home, put it in a makeshift cup, and left it on the kitchen table, along with a note, "So you don't forget that I still notice flowers." When Claire arrived, she noticed the gesture, smiled, and hugged him. But there was something in the embrace that was no longer whole. As if part of her was somewhere else. He felt it. But he said nothing. Because sometimes silence is the last thread before the break. Their anniversary was approaching. Claire seemed excited, planning something special, but didn't give many details. Ethan, though surprised, was happy. He thought maybe this awkward phase was passing. He imagined dinner, maybe a quick trip. He even started writing a letter, something he hadn't done in a long time. He reminisced about good times, sorted through old photos. He wanted to surprise her too. He was ready to rekindle everything. To renew their love. In the days leading up to the date, Claire went out a few nights, saying she was working out details with friends. Ethan didn't question it. He believed. He trusted. There was still the belief, despite the signs, that love would endure. That the foundation built with such care wouldn't give way for so little. That it was possible to reconnect, to find his breath again. He didn't want to think that her smile was more alive away from him than when she got home. He didn't want to believe that her touch, now hurried, was no longer a refuge, but protocol. And so, between small gestures and larger silences, the birthday arrived. But nothing happened as he expected. And for the first time, Ethan looked inside himself and realized that something much bigger was breaking. It wasn't the end yet. But it was the beginning of a point of no return. And what would come next, would change everything. The rain fell as if the sky wanted to wash the world clean. Ethan drove in silence, his windshield wipers beating slowly in contrast to his racing heart. It had been a few weeks since the forgotten birthday, and something inside him had broken completely. It wasn't anger, nor jealousy. It was a bitter mix of intuition and disappointment. Claire was distant, her gestures calculated, and the gaze that once sought his now fled. There was no longer spontaneity, only attempts at normalcy. Until that night, she said she was going out with her friends, that she needed to clear her head. Ethan simply nodded. The sound of the door closing echoed through the house like an omen. He sat on the couch, glancing at his watch, and before he knew it, he was already reaching for his car keys. He didn't know what he expected to find, only that he couldn't sleep without knowing. Instinct guided him. Love, even wounded, still knew the way. He followed her car at a safe distance, watching the red lights disappear into the wet horizon. Every mile they traveled seemed to cut a piece of what he believed. And then, suddenly, she turned onto a street that led to no bar, no friend's house. It was a calm, almost silent residential area, where the windows had white curtains and dogs slept on the porches. When she stopped in front of a house with a simple facade and a black gate, his body froze. She got out, smiling, fixed her hair, and pressed the doorbell. The gate opened immediately, as if she'd been waiting. And she walked in. Without hesitation. Without looking back. Ethan stood there, inside the car, the engine still running, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. Raindrops ran down the windshield and mingled with the tears he pretended not to be crying. The scene before him was the kind of thing no heart should see. It was the silent breaking point, where love realizes it's no longer love for the other. He stood there for a while, long enough to understand what he didn't want to understand. Then he simply turned off the car and drove away. That night, He slept at another house, that of a childhood friend, without explaining why. He simply said he needed to think. The next morning, she returned home. The kitchen was as usual, cups in the sink, the scent of perfume in the air, and her absence filling the spaces. She sat at the table and wrote a note. There was no anger in the words, only contained pain: stay with those who already have their lies. She folded the paper and left it on the table. Then she packed a small bag and left. When Clare returned, she found the note in silence. She called countless times, crying. She said she had made a mistake, that she could explain, that nothing was as it seemed. He didn't answer. And for days, the phone continued to ring in vain. Time passed, and what had once been an open wound began to heal. Ethan moved on. He met someone new, someone simple, quick to laugh, who looked at him sincerely and made him believe once again that loyalty still existed. There was no rush, no fear. It was a calm relationship, built without mistrust. He relearned how to smile, how to live, how to breathe without the weight of memories. Life, finally, had sound, color, and flavor again. Meanwhile, Clare was falling apart in silence. The boss who had once seemed interested became distant, cold, and soon disappeared from her life. Her friends drifted away. The sparkle in her eyes faded. She tried to distract herself, to convince herself that everything would be the same, but the nights were too long, and the pillow too wet. Guilt began to eat away at every memory. She saw Ethan everywhere, at breakfast, on the street, in the songs, in the voices of the people around her. He was everywhere, except with her. She tried to look for him, but he wouldn't talk. She tried to send him letters, but he didn't respond. She tried to reappear at the old house, but found another woman opening the gate and smiling with the same serene look that had once been hers. Time, relentless, followed its course. Months turned into years, and she remained trapped in the past, nursing a regret that wouldn't dissipate. She dreamed of him often. In those dreams, he still loved her. Sometimes she woke with her heart racing, swearing she felt his touch. Other times, she cried when she realized she was alone. Regret became her companion. And as the days passed, she understood that there are pains that don't ask for forgiveness, they just linger. One night, after an exhausting day, she dreamed of Ethan again. The dream was different from the others. It felt all too real. He was standing before her, with the same calm gaze as before, but there was something different, a deep serenity, a light she hadn't remembered seeing in him. He smiled and asked if she still thought about him. She replied, through tears, that she did, every day. He reached out his hand, and when she tried to touch it, he disappeared. She woke with her heart racing, calling his name in the darkness. She got up shakily, turned on the lights, and went to the bookshelf where she kept old mementos. At the bottom of a wooden box, she found photos, letters, and small objects he had left behind. Each memory carried an unbearable weight. But just when she thought she had seen it all, something caught her eye, a brown envelope, yellowed with age, sealed with tape. She couldn't remember seeing it before. Her hands began to sweat. She opened it carefully, and inside found a letter. The handwriting was his, but the tone was different, deeper, more serene. She began to read, her voice breaking between sobs. In the letter, Ethan recounted everything he'd felt during that time, every pain swallowed, every tear held back. He said he had truly loved her, and that even though he'd been hurt, he hadn't wished her harm. That forgiveness had come, but not return. That he'd learned that love isn't about possessing, but about desiring what was most pure. He thanked her for teaching him about boundaries, the value of loyalty, the danger of little lies. And at the end of the letter, there was a sentence that pierced her soul: one day, when silence keeps you company, you'll understand that I was the noise that gave you peace. Clare fell to her knees, the paper in her hands, her tears choked. The sound of the rain outside was the same as that night it all began. The same tone, the same melancholy. She understood, too late, that his forgiveness wasn't an invitation. It was dismissal. That his silence wasn't disinterest. It was healing. And that the dream that night wasn't just a dream, it was the goodbye that was missing. The following days were silent. Claire began revisiting the places where they'd shared moments, trying to reconnect with something that no longer existed. She went to the cafe where they'd met, to the square where he used to read while she talked endlessly. In every corner, a memory. In every memory, his absence. And for the first time, she understood what it was like to miss someone not because you wanted them back, but because you knew you'd never find anyone like them again. A few months later, she found out that Ethan had gotten married. The news came from a mutual friend, who showed her a photo of the ceremony. He was smiling, serene, his eyes filled with the same peace she had once admired. The woman beside him had a sweet, genuine look in her eyes. There was no room for bitterness, only for the certainty that he was happy. Claire closed her phone and took a deep breath. The pain didn't disappear, but it transformed. Now, it was the weight of someone who understands what they lost and what will never return. That night, sitting on the balcony of a small apartment, she wrote a final message, not to send, but to herself. He forgave me, but he didn't come back. And I deserved it. She tucked the paper into the same box as his letter, as if that would bring closure to that cycle. When she turned out the lights and went to sleep, she cried, not with anger, but only with longing. And before closing her eyes, she whispered to the void, if there is another life, may I know how to love properly. Across town, Ethan looked up at the sky before falling asleep, holding the woman who was now his home. He felt a deep peace, without knowing why. Maybe it was just his heart finally understanding that sometimes the right ending is the greatest act of love one can offer. On the morning before their final reunion, Claire awoke with sunken eyes and an exhausted body. The still damp pillow revealed the battles only she had witnessed. There was no longer any makeup to disguise the guilt etched in every gesture, and even her own reflection in the mirror seemed to avoid her. Her expression bore the weariness of someone who spent nights trying to rewind time, rewrite decisions, redo promises, begging for a chance fate had already denied her. She knew. Even before sunrise, something inside her knew that day would bring an end. She dressed unhurriedly, as if preparing the body for a silent wake. There was no rush, no hope, only the need to face what remained. She walked to the place where she knew she would see him again, even if from afar. It was a quiet square, where he often strolled in the late afternoons. She arrived first, sat on her usual bench, and waited. Time seemed to drag, and each second was a cruel reminder that the memories now belonged only to her. When he appeared, he wasn't alone. He was beside the woman who now shared his life, pushing a baby stroller, smiling with a naturalness that hurt more than any words. Claire froze. That scene was a portrait of everything she had lost. Ethan didn't see her right away. He walked lightly, as if he no longer carried ghosts. It was impossible not to notice how peaceful he seemed, how his eyes no longer held the shadows of the past. When he finally saw her, there was a brief pause. An exchanged glance, a suspended moment. He didn't look away, didn't quicken his pace. He simply looked at her with the serenity of someone who has forgiven and moved on. Claire tried to smile, but her face didn't respond. Her throat tightened. She waited for him to come closer, to say something, anything. But he only nodded slightly and continued walking, without turning back. And in that silent gesture, she understood that the true love she had once held was now beyond her reach. There was no hurt in his gaze, only distance. The deepest pain she felt wasn't the abandonment, nor the contempt, it was the realization that the man she had loved deeply had stopped loving her, and in such a quiet, final way, that there wasn't even room for an apology. She sat there for hours, staring into the void, reliving the details of a life that no longer existed. In her mind, she repeated his name like a prayer, as if that way she could keep some part of him alive within her. But deep down, she knew all that remained was regret. And this was not a temporary punishment, but a lifelong sentence. She decided then and there to stop trying to find him. To stop invading the new space he had built. It was too late. She knew it. From then on, she would walk with the pieces she had created, remembering not what she had lost, but what she had destroyed with her own hands. Ethan, for his part, returned home with a light heart. He no longer felt anger. Only compassion. Looking at Clare, he saw the woman he had loved, yes, but who had stayed behind by choice. And although that reunion had stirred old memories, he was at peace with his decisions. The woman by his side was his present, and the future they were building together no longer left room for doubt or comparison. During the night, as he cradled the child in his arms, he reflected on the paths life takes and how sometimes the best thing anyone can do is allow the past to stay exactly where it belongs. He had learned that forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation, and that some losses are silent deliverances. Over time, Ethan continued to live with dignity, surrounded by people who loved him sincerely. He transformed the pain he once felt into maturity, and the betrayal that wounded him into a valuable learning experience. He was a complete man, not because he was never broken, but because he knew how to rebuild himself with honesty. He spent his days caring for his family, present in every detail, and never again needed to look back with doubt or regret. The trust he placed in his new partner was not blind, but conscious. He knew that healthy love doesn't require desperate proofs or empty promises. Just be there. Just don't lie. Clare, on the other hand, sank into an increasingly lonely routine. She tried to get back on her feet, yes, she sought new paths, even met new people. But whenever someone got too close, she backed away. It wasn't fear of getting hurt. It was shame of having hurt someone who never deserved it. She began to avoid places that reminded her of Ethan, but even the gray sky reminded her of the days when her heart was light. She continued to dream of him, but in those dreams, he no longer loved her. And waking from those dreams was the greatest punishment, because for a few minutes, she believed there was still time, until reality ripped that illusion away with the coldness of a blade. Regret became her only constant companion, her most faithful memory. And the certainty that there are no second chances for those who destroy their only one. Years later, she wrote a letter she never sent. In it, she thanked him for everything they'd shared, apologized for the lies, and said that if she could go back, she would have done everything differently. She ended with a sentence that hurt her more than anyone else: "You were my home, and I chose to leave." She folded the paper carefully, placed it in a box where she kept the few things that still connected her to the past, and tucked it away in the back of her closet. It wasn't a plea for him to return, nor an attempt to reconnect. It was simply an acknowledgement that losing him was the biggest mistake of her life. And that she would have to live with that mistake until her last breath. Time followed its course, as it always does. Ethan grew old surrounded by love, children, and serenity. Clare grew old with dignity, but with an empty heart. Of all the choices she made, the one that hurt the most was not choosing to fight for someone who never stopped choosing her, even when everything seemed to be falling apart. Life taught her, the hard way, that some doors, once closed, never open again. And that love, when betrayed, can forgive, but never repeats itself. If you've made it this far, you've certainly felt the impact of this story firsthand. Comment below with your thoughts, what struck you most, and what lesson this narrative taught you. Your opinion is important so we can continue bringing you stories that touch the soul. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to receive more moving stories like this. This story is fictional, but the feeling is real. It shows us how betrayal doesn't just destroy relationships, it destroys respect, affection, the history we've built, and most importantly, trust, which, once broken, rarely returns to its former self. The greatest pain of betrayal isn't the act itself, but the slow destruction of everything that was true. Here on this channel, we don't support, encourage, or romanticize any kind of betrayal. Our goal is clear: to show that some choices cost more than you can afford. Think carefully before crossing the line. Because sometimes, the person you lose to a lie, was the very person who would have spent their entire lives telling the truth by your side.